5 men, the duellists, their seconds and Dr. Wem himself, met on a chill morning, a bit like today I expect, at a remote clearing in Nevendon bushes. This is where we think it was. The antagonists were asked if they would shake hands, and following a refusal from both to do so, the duel was commenced. Having paced the prescribed distance apart and raised their pistols, there was a long pause, both men being so convulsed with nerves that it was impossible for them to take aim. Finally, Y pulled the trigger, by mistake, says Wem, and his ball narrowly missed one of the seconds, so it wasn't a great shot. Y then began to shake even more violently, his terror amplified by the fact that X suddenly presented a spectacle of unnatural composure. Having adopted on the instant a rigid duelist stance, his marksman's eyes fixed not on the quivering Mr. Y, but on some infinitely remote point beyond. He stood as if aiming steadily, but to the mounting anguish of those present, still did not pull the trigger. The 3 observers, feeling that a reasonable time had expired and that X had decided not to fire, were on the point of moving forward to take his pistol when he let out a terrible cry, put the muzzle of the pistol to his mouth and pulled the trigger. He was not quite dead when Dr. Wem reached him, and he was heard to utter these words: "I would not look upon his face." Since no homicide had been committed, the affair gave the doctor no further trouble, other than a nagging curiosity about what it was that X had seen. So, no one really knows what it is he saw, but he certainly acted very strangely. Often people would talk about never looking on the face of the devil in years gone by. Perhaps that's what he's said to have seen here. We're just going to leave the path here, ladies and gents. We're going to go into this tiny little clearing. You can see there's a slight depression here in the ground, and this is a result of people using this for fires for many years, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. You see there's a little seat up in the tree as well, which may well have been used for a lookout post at some time, which relates to the story we've got here. This is the Nevendon Tale, and this is called The Coven and the Gangster's Torso. This is slightly more up to date than the other ones I've been telling you. They were a few hundred years ago. This story apparently happened in 1972, just around this area. What happened is, well, I'll read you the little intro first. The fact that Nevendon Wood's slightly sinister reputation, as we've seen from some of the other stories, has caused it to possibly be less frequented than such an amenity might otherwise be, has ironically made it attractive to those who wish to go about their business secretly. It was almost inevitable that eventually 2 such parties would bump into one another in this really rather modestly proportioned woods. Today, of course, it is quite small, really, it's not massive. Obviously, years ago it would have been. So what happened was, on a September night in 1972, the self-styled Basil Wickham brothers and sisters, or the Co-op Coven as they were dubbed in the tabloid newspapers on account of the fact that several members were also co-op employees, came into startling contact with 2 gangsters trying to dispose of a third. Do we all know what Wiccans are?
Yeah. I don't know.
No.
Yeah, they're the sort of it's a kind of pagan religion to do with witchcraft, basically. So they came into contact with 2 gangsters who were trying to dispose of a third gangster. Despite the hundreds of hours of police interviews with those concerned, the details are not clear about how this happened, since common sense would dictate that two men trying to hide a body would move away from, not towards, a fire they saw burning in a forest, which is what the gangsters saw here. Possibly they had some idea of burning the body they were trying to dispose of before burying it, and had arranged this with some accomplice they were planning to meet there. Possibly, as Londoners, they were unused to the total darkness of a wood at night and instinctively sought out a light. Now, the Wiccans who were here with their fire that night tell a story that all they were doing was they were engaged in a simple earth blessing ceremony just in this area, not the naked satanic orgy that the tabloid newspapers said they were involved in. They were sky-clad, as they call it, which we would call naked, of course, when all of a sudden two men came bursting through these bushes just here off the path, dropped a large package just here and ran away. Some said it was clear to all the people present that the package contained a body, while others maintained that it was not clear at all, and that's why they thought it was best not to trouble the authorities. It was some weeks before two of the coven broke ranks and approached the police about it. Apparently they had all been hoping the body would be discovered by someone else and they wouldn't have to report it themselves, thus sparing them the unwanted press attention and consequent career setbacks. But then they must have known that that was unlikely. It was, after all, the strange desertion of Nevendon Wood that had caused them to choose it in the first place. The torso was easily identified as one of that called Roy Voicey. It had Roy Voicey tattooed on the chest. And two of his known associates, the Vane brothers, were arrested and successfully prosecuted for his murder. Well, I'm going to tell you the last of the Nevendon Tales that we have for you, but apparently the Nevins, or pronounced Nevin, are an ancient Basildon family, but their great wealth has been acquired only comparatively recently, a product of their successful dealings in jute and copper during the 19th century. One of the first of the clan to enjoy this astounding wealth was the eccentric socialite and animal lover Tory Nevin, who spent the years following World War I giving balls and rescuing animals. Between 1919 and 1923, she was host to 170 outlandishly and outrageously costly lavish parties, and was responsible for the rescue of some 700 animals. These ranging from exhausted pit ponies and emaciated fairground monkeys to big cats and alligators rescued, as she thought, from Africa. The collection was ended abruptly when she became aware that a persistent skin condition she had thought due to her nerves was in fact mange. She had the entire menagerie destroyed in one day. Then, mad with remorse, she had built at enormous expense a huge crypt beneath the wood, modelled on the recently discovered tomb of Tutankhamun, and filled it with the mummified remains of a great assortment of creatures, including ostriches, shrews, leopards, close your ears, spaniels and goldfish. She was allowed to use the woods for her crypt because of an ancient favour granted the Nevins by Edward III for stablery and succour. So apparently they must have put him up at some time. But somewhere under here are all those animals that she had killed because of having the mange, all buried somewhere. So there are some of the Nevendon Tales for you that we've discovered.